there. Welcome to Cageless, a conversation podcast about experiential wisdom and personal hope. I'm Jenny Johnson. I'm a writer, and I'm asking experts, thought leaders, and my friends to share their knowledge and tools on how they found freedom. Welcome to Season 1. Today is a very special day because I am talking to a very special person. She holds so much wisdom, and she's an expert and advocate for something I care deeply about, and I think is a pillar for humans here on this planet. This is Victoria, and I am unreasonably excited to talk to her. Victoria, how are you?
I'm doing really fantastically. Thank you so much for asking.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and where you came from?
I am Victoria, as you've mentioned, and I am essentially a spiritual advisor, spiritual mentor who's very centered on you, not me, as your spiritual teacher. I'm just kind of like the backup support, the secretary, if anything. And I kind of fell into this role due to my background in kind of my life story, where I was born in Hong Kong. I've lived in 6 countries. I've attended international schools my entire life. And so I really had this diverse background and understanding of differences in people, in ways of thinking, in the way that we perceive our identities, the way we perceive each other. And that kind of entered my academic career as well, by which I was studying international studies, philosophy, and religion, and then went on to study political science for my grad school program. And all of this time was just this accumulation of understanding more deeply the concepts of culture and identity. And that is something I feel is so important when it comes to doing spiritual work, by which we try to expand as much as we can through philosophy and then apply it in our daily practice of entering the unknown.
Wow. We are going to have to cap this. We're going to talk for forever. You say that you were born in Hong Kong. How did that come to? Are your parents originally from there?
Yes. Both my parents grew up on the main Hong Kong island, born and raised. Hong Kong is actually, I gotta keep this short, but Hong Kong is actually an island of immigrants. It was originally a small fishing village until the British kind of took it over, and it kind of ballooned in population and size. It has a population now of 7 million. When it first started, it was like a few thousand people. And so most of the people that came to Hong Kong were immigrants. My father's side was from the mainland, from China, and then my mom's side, they'd been in Hong Kong for a while. She had a few generations, but there was a bit of a mix of European immigrants and stuff. So I'm actually like a 4th generation mixed person.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
That's the mix of like East versus West, and growing up as a mixed person in Asia compared to being a mixed person in like the States, it's a completely different kind of perspective.
So many different, I always say that like you're a product of everywhere that you've been and everyone that you've met. And you are just like, so vast in terms of like your exposure to people and places. So in terms of you seem to be very interested in humans, right? Like the subject of like why we're here, who we are, and kind of like dissecting that, right? So when did that interest start to peak for you?
So that interest started to peak for me, I think, between my freshman year and my sophomore year in undergrad. I was very lost. I had started off as a history major, and then all of a sudden I was like, I was born and raised Catholic, and I didn't identify very well with the religion. So I thought to myself, maybe if I study my way into my religion,
Yeah.
I'll finally get it. Maybe there's something missing there that I'll be like, yes, this is the part that I was missing. And when you're in university, you have like that person that it's kind of like a guidance counselor, but for university.
I think it is a counselor, right?
I think so, something like that. But this man, I have never loved a human being more than this man. He he really loved every single person that came in through that door. And I remember sitting with him, and he was talking to me about my life and things, and goes, Victoria, he goes, this why don't you just take international studies, because it's kind of accumulation of who you are, but like in a major.
And you were like, so true.
It took me a second. I was like, oh my God, I can study myself.
Yes. And all that it took was like one guy just like echoing back what you said to him, because you can't be your own coach. You can't be
Yeah.
your own
Yeah.
counselor,
The
you
more
know?
you allow yourself to be perceived, and the more that you allow yourself to put yourself out there to meet people. um, I never identified, by the way, as a people person until last year, which is really hilarious because I've been doing the exact same thing my whole life. And it comes down to identity, right? When I started to kind of realize that, I was like, oh, that's kind of why I've been able to expand my understanding of people and the universe and all of these things, because I'm allowing myself to be perceived. And being perceived isn't just like put yourself on the internet, right? Being perceived can also be the little things, like not being afraid that you going up to a person that you're seeing on the street or in the grocery store, and not worrying too much about what they think about you. Obviously, don't go up to someone to tell them you hate their shoes, but to allow yourself to make those connections and not worry too much about someone judging you in a negative perception.
And I think you saying being perceived, I think that kind of also comes from, for lack of better terms, confidence in who you are. I hate how all the cliches are true, but it's like confidence is like going into a room. It's not that will they like me, it's like, do I like me? And like, do I stand by what I say? It's an integrity thing. And the more that you are willing to be perceived and show up, which, like, Miss Brene Brown always says, like, get into the arena being vulnerable, the more that you're probably going to learn, the more that you are going to be exposed to different experiences. Because why else are you on this earth, guys? Like, why isn't it kind of like boring to like hoard yourself? Like, why are you gatekeeping yourself? And in terms of identity, as you were dissecting kind of, oh, this is what I've been taught in terms of like Catholicism and spirituality and things that you'd been exposed to, you started to study and be interested in, what do I believe? What am I about to teach myself, or what can I possibly learn? And what did you come about? Where is your mind at in terms of like religion now?
My terms of where I am in religion now is actually this deep, profound love for it, in a way that is kind of like, okay, it's not for me, but I absolutely can learn something from every single religion or belief system that I come across.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting, because a lot of people within the spiritual communities, especially in the West, have a lot of anger, pain, and resentment towards their Christian upbringings, because
That's
a
right.
lot of people are transitioning from Christianity to spirituality, and it's borderless, right? But there's a lot of comfortability in staying in that Christian box. And so a lot of that, ironically, in spite of the hating the Christianity, they kind of start to adapt little pieces from it to try to apply it to spirituality, but spirituality doesn't have a box, right? So what happens is, instead of hating Christianity, I kind of decided to dissect it and kind of allow myself to space away from it, so that I can still appreciate the teachings and, little things about it, but not hold anything against it. And I think it's really important to not hold anything against it, because love it or hate it, it still resonates with you, right? Because if you hate it, it's always on your mind. If you love it, it's always in your heart.
And I don't think that any type of belief system is worth having unless it holds up to your questions, and it holds up to you taking the filter off and you being able to be like, do I believe this because I was taught this, or do I believe this because I actually believe it? And I love what you said about religion being borders, because on a personal standpoint, I was raised a Christian and then kind of came back to it and formed it myself. And I ended up working in vocational Christian ministry, working in an evangelical church. I went to seminary, and I dropped out because there were a lot of things that I disagreed with on a like fundamental level as a young adult. And I was like, I don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like how people are being treated. And I do not like working for a place where like God is thanked for parking garages, but not confronted for the Holocaust. You know what I mean? I don't want to say like I figured it out on my own, but I left that church. I left that life, but I didn't leave God. Like God still lives within me and he's still here. And I have been it's been the adventure of like my life thus far, is falling in love with Jesus again in a way that doesn't have to do with lights and sounds and Instagram posts and, you know, sneakers and preachers. So in terms of Christianity or religion or spirituality, what do you believe is like if it were a Venn diagram, what do you believe are the similarities and the differences, and why are they important? Like why is it important, do you believe, to have a belief system?
Oh, I love this. I really believe that the most fundamental component of any belief system comes down to hope. It comes down to that, you know, even in Christianity, I've noticed there's also a lot of calling you into the present moment as well.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more subtle and you have to really pay attention and listen. It's funny. So the past year I was living with my aunt and uncle who are very, very Catholic. And as a part of the requirement of living with them, I had to go to church every Sunday. And one of the most beautiful realizations I kind of came to was understanding that Jesus Christ embodies the energy of compassion. And so even if we don't identify with Christianity, we can identify with compassion.
Yeah.
And, I mean, obviously there's a lot of other things, but, compassion and empathy are components of love, right? And I think they're very important pillars of love. And without empathy, can there be love?
I don't think so.
And empathy is also a learned skill. So if that is the case, love is also a skill.
Yeah.
With that, right? I think religion is one of these unusual ways that obviously now it's a lot of different religions have gotten a bit contorted by certain leaders and just the way in this rigidity of like, this is how your religion has to be. Mm-hmm. But when it started off, the whole idea was to treat others like you would treat yourself, like you would want yourself to be treated, right? And it's funny because when I was studying comparative religions, that was kind of the pillar lesson in every single religion: treat others the way that you want to be treated. And there's always a different phrase, just slightly different, but that was the same one. And that is empathy, right? That is compassion, right? Looking at someone else and being like, okay, would I want to be treated that way? Would I want to be? Right. Probably not. Or, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. And you would think it's a simple lesson, but it's complex because human beings are complex.
Yes.
We're so complicated.
Right. And I do think that in terms of Christianity, which like I said, I'm a seminary dropout, so I didn't finish, but like Christianity and studying the religions that I am aware of, I do think that you saying that like empathy is the commonality there. As a young person in our culture today in 2022, I don't know. I get on, we look at our phones and I'm like, where's the freaking love, guys? Like everyone is so angry all of the time. Like why we watch the news or like we hear someone being canceled or there's so little hope. And I think that just like a fire, the more that you feed into it, the more that you engage with it, the more it becomes your reality. Like, is it Buddha that it's like, whatever you think becomes real? And I might be butchering that. I'll have to receipt myself. But that's the thing is like, it seems to me that feeding into hate breeds hate. So I don't think that we are serving ourselves until we start to deconstruct, until we start to look at, hey, like maybe if like I'm unhappy, or maybe if I don't like the way that the world is working, maybe I should look at, I don't know, the thousands of people in years before me of people also asking the same questions and maybe figuring it out for myself. So like if you don't like your world, why are you not changing it? At least your internal world, why are you not giving it a shot? And this is to be taken with a grain of salt because you and I both know people that have been hurt by religion and spirituality and belief practices. But you look at philosophers, you look at people who claim to be prophets, most of them, and unless, on a heretical realm. They were like aiming for hatred, but we're not talking about Hitler here. Most of them were aiming towards betterment. And if they weren't, I would assume you should probably, maybe close that book. But yeah, I think that's really, really cool that you decided to, instead of, just taking like what you'd been taught and throwing it away and becoming very apathetic and uninterested, that you decided to maybe just like look inside and like look outside too. Because whenever you can admit like there are other people that have also been asking the same questions as me, maybe they were on to something.
I think it comes down to this concept of life purpose, right? A lot of us are constantly searching for meaning. And I kind of learned that your life purpose is not something that you discover right now and move forward from now on to the future. It's something that you've always been.
Yeah.
And
That's
the
good.
one constant throughout my entire life, through all of these experiences, the ups and downs and the lefts and rights, and it was through my pains, my sufferings, right? When you mentioned a lot of hate going around, right, with the internet, I kind of learned that hatred comes from my disdain for myself, and then seeing that in others and everything else around me, and wanting so badly to change things, but feeling so powerless and hopeless that the only way I can communicate is through hatred and through fueling more fire and creating more problems, because people who suffer cause more suffering.
So true.
I've learned this even now on my spiritual path. As I really feel myself progressing, I still notice that in my suffering, I'm still causing suffering. And that's a really complex thing to grasp when you're going through the suffering and you're like, okay, I'm really suffering right now, and I'm causing all these things around me to kind of fall apart as I'm trying to fix my situations. But
chicken and the egg. Yeah.
You will find that in suffering kind of becomes a cycle. It's like a twister or tornado or something. You have to break the pattern. And it's not about, you don't necessarily have to start with everybody outside of you. Sometimes it starts from just within. We really strongly underestimate the power that we have within.
That's so true.
And I have been reading this nonstop in so many different books. There's a really fantastic book called The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kashimi and Fumitaga Koga. There's obviously Be Here Now by Ram Dass.
There he is, the guy.
There's one more. Thich Nhat Hanh. Anything by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's incredible. All of these incredible teachers are telling you, you change yourself and the whole world changes around you, because one, you're letting go of past stories that we possess about ourselves and others. And you'll be surprised how much perception affects the world around us, right? As I've said before, they're like different filters. Religion is one of them. Our identity is another one. And our identities are so colored and speckled, right? And we have a lot of histories of collective trauma, collective suffering. Our own personal families also have, generations of suffering, because we've all come from so many different, there is not a single person that does not have some kind of suffering to be reckoned with. And I think that is a universal truth. I don't believe in universal truths, as I've mentioned on my TikToks before, but universal truth, the one thing that we can agree on is that suffering exists. And
pain's here. Pain is here.
Yeah.
And also, I love what you said about it really just takes like one, a tornado, it just takes like one step out, like one step in the right direction. What's the next best thing that you can do? I was listening to Arthur Brooks, his podcast, he's a writer for The Atlantic. I think it's The Art of Happiness. I think his podcast has a different name now. But he was interviewing a psychotherapist who she was saying before she, gives someone Lexapro, someone who's been suffering, depressed, down in the dumps, she asked them like 3 questions. These are the 3 things that need to be fulfilled in like an adult's life for not happiness, but contentment. So like just staying in the middle of the boat, right? What does your community look like? Are you sitting alone in a room and you're not around anyone else who's helping out? Who are those? Or are you sitting with people who are metaphorically poking holes in your boat or like trying to bring you down? So what does your community look like? Because people need people. 2, are you having fun? Do you have any enjoyment in your life that is specifically for delight, that you don't have to get better at, that you don't have to perform for, that you don't have to achieve for, which is such a countercultural thing, especially now. We try to, Gen Z and millennials, we try to like monetize our hobbies. Like what is wrong with us? It's like, oh my gosh, you're allowed to read a comic book. You are literally allowed to do a puzzle and not post about it and care about how many likes you get or making money off of it. It's crazy. So are you having fun? And like, are you making time for fun? And 3, do you have a life purpose? Do you have a reason that you get up in the morning? Do you have a reason to be? Do you have a reason to exist here? Whether that is a religious practice that you believe in, what is that purpose? And I would also love to say, like, none of those things are your job. Isn't that funny? None of those things are the number in your bank account. Because last time I checked, no one's going to read your bank statements as a eulogy. So I think that, like, learning that, like, you need people, you need to love yourself and have fun, and you need to have a purpose. I personally, I don't believe in accidents. I think that humans are really good at messing things up. I think that we mess up things all of the time just because we are inherently, I stray away from the word evil. We are just inherently not smart until we've been taught to be smart or until we have some guidelines. And I think that comes from a place of a lot of trial and error, a lot of humility. I love what you were saying about these books that you've read, that there's a common thread there. I remember, because like I said, I personally come from a very Christian, pretty religious, non-exploratory background. And the first time I listened to Ram Dass was the worst day of my life thus far. And it's interesting because I met Jesus through words that Ram was saying. And it's like, he doesn't really identify as a Christian, but I do believe that like my higher power, my Jesus, my Christ was speaking through him. And like that, like I said, it was the worst day of my life. I remember exactly where I was. I was on the highway, and like I literally have never been in that dark of like a tornado, a spiral, for a lot of different reasons. But whenever you can take, like you were saying, you go to these Catholic masses. First of all, I'm not Catholic, and I freaking love mass. Like, I think it's the most like beautiful, intricate, sacred space that a lot of the time we don't have in our culture. And if I may critique our culture, which I don't need permission to do that, I do it all the time. So little things are sacred. So little things are holy. A lot of things are a defamation. And I think that if we can get past the hurt, if we can get past all of the pain and trauma that institutions have collectively caused, and I'm filtering myself here, when you can admit that there are people that know more than you, that's the most fertile ground to grow on. When you also have the confidence to say, I hear you. I don't fully believe you, but I hear you. And I think that there's something there. And then you allow yourself to explore. So which prompts my next question. Is there a particular book or a particular teacher that has really guided you to where you are now? Which I'm talking to a girl that like has studied philosophy and religion and I'm like, oh man, her reading list is probably fire.
A secret behind my reading list, I will tell you though, is I cannot sit down and read a book from start to finish. I am probably one of the most erratic people. I really want to share this with people because I think too often we're intimidated by the pages of a book because we're like looking at this thing and being like, it's like 30, 50 pages. I can't get through this.
Right.
And I really want to share this. A really important component of any spiritual practice comes down to your reading.
That's so true.
A really big part. And I am a terrible reader, right? I pick up a book, I will read 2 pages, close it, and find a different one, or get up or scroll through TikTok.
Squirrel brain, not your fault.
Right? It's so hard for me to stay focused, but I really do try. And sometimes I will put myself in situations where I can't do anything else except sit and read, right? I'll sit on a train. That's a great time. I
Yeah.
go out of my way to make space for that because reading is really important. It introduces you to new ways of thinking. When you don't have a
Hmm.
person that you can bounce ideas off of, a book is your best friend.
Right. And there's probably a reason a publisher published it.
Oh,
not
absolutely.
to not to being not to say that that there are bad books with bad advice, but whenever you're scrolling on a screen all day, there are some people that give real bad advice. There's some, and I'm even thinking in terms of like, spiritual teachers or like therapists or like people, like just be careful who you're taking advice from. I mean, this also comes from people in your life too. No one's thought checking anyone, just knowing like where you're getting your information from. You were saying reading.
Sorry, yes. I would definitely say that my go-to author is still Thich Nhat Hanh. He passed away last weekend,
Oh my.
and he was 95, so he's lived a really long life. He's a Buddhist monk
Hmm.
who was from Vietnam. He endured the entirety of the Vietnam War and was eventually exiled, in part because of it, and ended up building a monastery in France,
Hmm.
and also is an interfaith scholar. And he's really been able to bring Buddhism to the West.
Hmm.
And something that I really admire about him is this capacity to understand how to communicate with people in the Western world and teach these concepts in a way that have never been taught before.
Hmm.
And so he really is a mindfulness leader in helping us to understand the power of the present moment, in embracing our suffering, and also being able to transmute that suffering,
Hmm.
and how to move forward from that, and how to really make the most of every single day. And
Hmm.
something that I think a lot of us who adopt spirituality and understand, we a lot of us take on spirituality because we're trying to seek solace for our suffering,
Yeah.
and then don't move forward from that. But something that was really important for him was fighting for the rights of other people,
Doing something
right?
about it.
In doing something about alleviating the suffering of others.
Mm.
And there's a quote by Osho about how suffering, like joy, is not something that you can celebrate on a lonely island. You have to share that joy with others.
It's so good.
So, right, it's beautiful to kind of see these spiritual leaders engaging in activism and doing something they care about, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the Western spiritual leaders we see are very apolitical.
Hmm.
It's almost a bit indifferent because a lot of Western spirituality kind of revolves around the concepts of avoiding suffering
Yeah.
or trying to cover it up and
Hmm.
pretend like, okay, because I'm spiritual, suddenly everything is great now.
Yeah.
My life is a fairy tale,
Which is
and
just as toxic as like the opposite of sweeping it under the rug and pretending like it doesn't exist. It's just as
it's
bad.
just as bad. It's just as bad. It's hurtful, right? It causes more suffering. I've fought a lot of people on TikTok over the concepts of good and bad, and I remember you commented once. There's an importance in identifying people not as good and bad, but as helpful or unhelpful,
Hmm.
which I really love, right? To move away from these generalized terms of good, bad,
Yeah.
right? Good, evil.
Yeah.
It doesn't help us.
And I think the best way I hate the old. Do you feel this way? I'm 26, and the older I get, all the cliches become true, and it makes me really mad because I'm like, I thought that I was figuring this out all alone, and I was so smart. No, I'm not. There's so many people that know better than me, and there's a reason a lot of cliches are cliches. But the best way out is through. And I have learned that when you sweep things under the rug or when you paint someone as good or bad or when you're just like, I'm just moving on and am for more or less like ignoring or like not willing to be taught, like there's a God and I'm not him, her, they, them. There is something that's bigger than me. This situation is bigger than me. I need to be at a place of humility where I am willing to learn from it. And I am willing to be a sponge. Not even a sponge, more of like a what are the things that you like drain beans with?
uh like a colander.
Yeah, like I should be a colander and like I should understand that like something doesn't have to be all good or bad. There can be gray and purple and green and all of these different colors and like the human experience, what is it? Chew the meat, spit out the bones. You know, specifically with like relationships, with parenting, with friendships, with peers, with religion, painting something as good or bad. And if you can say, was this helpful to me or was this harmful to me? Because also, like I said, at the end of the day, I think we are all inherently selfish. We're all inherently hurting. We're all inherently in need of guidance. And we're all also capable of those things, which is cool because it's all about the power of choice, the power of choosing to love rather than choosing to hate. And I think that whenever you can make that decision on a daily basis, it's a place of surrender. And I know many people are accustomed to the Alcoholics Anonymous programs, the NA programs, the programs that help people with substance abuse. The Serenity Prayer, whether you're religious or not, is in I can link it below if whoever's listening hasn't heard it. But even if you can like surrender, I think that is the most you feel them. It's interesting when you feel the most powerful, when you feel the most weak, when you're like allowing yourself to be a student of the universe. You're allowing to not, twist the arm of fate at all and just be like, what am I willing to learn here? Like, what am I willing to stop controlling and just start confronting?
Yeah, there's something to be said about the power of surrender and hope, because I think we deeply, deeply underestimate these things as superpowers almost, right? Because hope kind of transcends into life purpose, into giving us a meaning to move forward, something that helps us wake up in the morning every day. And then surrender is what helps us to keep going. Hope and surrender are actually like two sides of the same coin, I would say, right?
Yeah.
How like surrender, like hope is being able to move forward without even knowing that it's possible. That like, maybe it's, it's moving away from the possibility that it cannot happen, right? It's the possibility that it can happen. And then surrendering to it gets you to continue with that hope.
That's so good.
Right? The power of spirituality is the hope and the surrender and the trust in a unknown higher being, higher power. And more importantly even is the trust in others, in community, that gets us, right? Because a big component of Alcoholics Anonymous, as you mentioned, is that capacity for community. You know how like you see people on the internet who are like, don't share your aspirations and your goals, like, keep them to yourself, and because someone's gonna like put bad energy all over it.
Sounds like gatekeeping to me.
If people who are supposed to be your friends are not in support of you, they're not your friends.
Mic drop.
Find people, allow yourself to share your aspirations, and find people who have those same aspirations to push you forward together.
And if those people are not in support of the good that you are wanting to exert into the universe, leave. Because I promise you, there are people out there that are looking for exactly what you're offering, exactly what you're exuding. You just have to have the hope and the surrender to do that.
That is so important.
If your friend group is like dragging you down and you're like, no, like maybe they'll get better, or like maybe I just need to, no, you don't need to, you can't change another person. Hate to say it. Hate to be the one. If no one's told you, you can't change other people. You can influence other people, but you have to fill your cup, and you can't help anyone else until you help yourself. So yeah, no, I absolutely think that there is so much power in hope. And if we can just make hope cool again, you can only get so much out of venting, and you can only get so much out of being which I fully am all about, like wanting to be understood and understand and like feeling that. But like when you're all scratching these itches on each other, you're gonna start to bleed. So why don't we start like putting Band-Aids on instead of like scratching that itch? Gossip or, substance abuse, whatever those things are that are harming you and harming you collectively. I believe it's Miss Elizabeth Gilbert, who is one of my personal heroes. It's my understanding that the health of the universe is reliant on the health of each individual in it. And the more that each person can find health and like well-being in themselves, it's going to be like a domino effect. or it's going to be oil and water. And you're going to recognize really quickly who is not on your team, who is not wanting to be helped. Because I do have the optimistic point of view that every person's capable of change. And every single one of us, if you were born on this earth with a soul, you're worthy, you are capable of change, and you are deserving of contentment. You are deserving of it. And whenever you can accept that in yourself, the more that you start to see it in the world around you, right? Okay, so closing out here a little bit, something that I love to ask people is, if you could tell your younger self anything, what would you say to young Victoria?
Risks are good. Risks mean that you are on the right path. Because when you make mistakes, when you do difficult things, it doesn't matter what the outcome is. The journey is more important, because at least you did everything you could to take that risk and go down in friggin' flames. Resilient, you develop resilience. You learn that the power of hope gets you really, really far. And it takes you to places you didn't even believe were possible. I think there is a lot of value in really listening to other people and really only taking what resonates. Like really, really learning how to develop that relationship to your body, by which you can feel what advice is for you and what is not for you. You'll know when you start to develop that practice of listening to your body. When advice feels right, it will feel right.
Because there is a difference between like your intuition and like there's always going to be like an inner critic, or like the voice of like someone that isn't you in your head. I believe that there's a force of evil in this world and on this side of eternity, and he is very cunning and intelligent. So that's the voice in my head, that critic in my head, versus like my intuition, my like the string that's connected to my personal higher power, this personal source of wisdom. Because like, for example, you know, you could be walking down the street, and as like a white woman, I see like a black man, and I'm like, oh, I'm scared. You know, like my intuition's telling me that I need to like run away. And it's like, I kind of think maybe that was more like social conditioning, or that was like kind of like a lie that I've been taught. That's like an evil, incorrect thought. You know, that's not my intuition. That's not my intuition, right? Something that I have started doing, whenever I encounter a new person, I body check right after I leave them. Your body, literally the book, I think The Body Keeps Scores, somewhere in my office. Your body doesn't lie.
Yeah.
It's not lying to you. It never is. If it's hungry and if it's growling, guess what? You're hungry. If you're sleepy and your eyes are falling asleep, you're sleepy. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, your body's not lying to you. I think that it's so important to know thyself, so you can know and love other people.
Absolutely.
Oh my word, Victoria. Like we said, we could probably talk for a really long time, and we probably will after this. But thank you so much for sharing your story and your all of your insights today on Cageless. Can you tell us where we can get in contact with you, where we can ask you questions, where we can find your work?
You can find me on my socials at victoria.therese on TikTok, and on Instagram at Victoriella. And you can also find me on my website at Gray and Gray, which the website link is GREYGRAY.ca, because I am proudly Canadian. So
Genius. And I will have all of those resources linked below. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time on Cageless. If you enjoyed or learned anything from today's episode, I want to hear from you. Shoot me a text or call to 903-871-5092. It's completely free and anonymous if you choose. You can also shoot me an Instagram DM, that's in the show notes, or follow along with the Cageless newsletter. And don't forget to be kind to yourself today.